Good evening. Thanks for coming. I'm Mark Spicer, Chair of the Music Department at Hunter College, and I'm pleased to introduce this very special concert, New Deal, New Music, performed by Duo Extempore, featuring a 2015 graduate of Hunter's MA program in music, Nicole Brancato on keyboard, and Evan Jagels on bass. Their site-specific curated improvisations draw musical inspiration from classical music and jazz, pushing the boundaries of what piano and bass can do together, and redefining the role of musical improvisation as a means of telling stories and exploring history. Between President Roosevelt's election in November of 1932 and his inauguration in March of 1933, he met regularly with his brain trust on the second floor of Roosevelt House, so right above where we are now, to begin establishing the tone and content for the first 100 days and the New Deal. Marking the 90th anniversary, this performance by Duo Extempore promises to generate a deeper appreciation for the extraordinary New Deal improvisations of policy and government that lifted the American people out of the despair of the Great Depression into a better, safer, more secure future. I'm also told that a musical performance like this is something brand new for Roosevelt House, so we're improvising all around. So please welcome Duo Extempore.
Good evening, and thank you. It is such a treat to present this event to all of you this evening. Oh, should I move it down? I know, well, you know, Evan is pretty tall, and I'm not quite as tall. Better. Okay, thank you for telling me. Just to start out, I'd love to thank our hosts for this evening, Mac Barrett and the Roosevelt House. They were really instrumental in putting this together, as well as the music department, Mark Spicer, Jeffrey Burleson, everyone who was involved in making this evening happen. This is so special to us. We actually have had quite a number of projects that ended up involving the Roosevelts or tangential themes to them. One was at Hyde Hall, which was a manor, neoclassical manor upstate, where the Roosevelts actually visited. And another was a film that was shot on Roosevelt Island. So this is something that feels a little bit like coming full circle for us. And we hope that you really enjoy it. We're excited to explore the themes and stories surrounding the origins, impact, and legacy of the New Deal and the Roosevelt House.
Readjust that. So FDR and Eleanor were married in March of 1905 and spent a week just up the river in Hyde Park. During Christmas time, FDR's mother, Sarah, promised them a new home, giving them a sketch of a single townhouse with a note that said, "Number and street not yet decided," 19 or 20 feet wide. In 1907, Sarah bought this property, which at the time had 2 brownstones built in 1876, and she paid $79,000. She had them demolished and decided to construct one building that would have 2 residences, one for herself and one for Franklin and Eleanor, to be designed by Charles Platt. The total cost of the land, construction, and architect's fee was $247,000, which in today's money is about $7,904,000. So in December 1908, Franklin, Eleanor, and their 2 young children moved into one of the residences and Sarah to the other. Over the course of the next 24 years, this house was the launching pad for Franklin's political career, from New York State Senator to President of the United States. Here, he renewed his strength and optimism after polio left him unable to walk in 1921. That brings us here to this auditorium space itself, which was originally the kitchen of the house. And we're told that Eleanor made a mean grilled cheese here. So for our first piece tonight, we want you to listen in for these stories: the wedding, the demolition, the construction of the space we are in now, and finally for the familiar sounds of a busy kitchen, feeding family and eventually fueling the efforts of FDR and his team as they began to conceive the New Deal.
Thank you. While the Roosevelt family lived here, many important visitors passed through the house's doors. Among them was Mary McLeod Bethune, the daughter of formerly enslaved parents, who would become one of the most important Black educators, civil and women's rights leaders, and government officials of the 20th century. The college she founded set educational standards for today's Black colleges, and her role as an advisor to the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave African Americans an advocate in government. Another, and very important one, was Frances Perkins, who was a workers' rights advocate and was the first woman ever to serve in a presidential cabinet. When President-elect Roosevelt asked Frances Perkins to serve in his cabinet as Secretary of Labor, she outlined for him her policy priorities, and they, even from a modern perspective, are astounding. Workers' compensation, abolition of child labor, a 40-hour work week, minimum wage, Social Security was a pivotal one, and even on her list, universal health insurance. You know. She made it clear to Roosevelt that his agreement with these priorities was a condition of her joining his cabinet. Roosevelt said he endorsed them all, and she became the first woman in the nation to serve in a presidential cabinet. After his election to presidency in 1932, Roosevelt assembled his administration here. FDR's meetings at the Roosevelt House during the winter of 32 to 33, before his inauguration, helped to set the tone and content of the first 100 days, and indeed the early New Deal itself. In this next piece, listen for ideas and visions of these revolutionary moments in the keyboard. And on the other hand, in the bass, discussions, arguments, and agreements that made the policy. Thank you.
but easier each time. So whether you are here in the audience or watching at home on the live stream, electricity tonight is bringing music to your ears. It's hard to imagine a time when electricity was not ubiquitous. However, in 1935, only about 10% of American farms had electricity. Compared to France, Germany, and Japan, with around 90%, the US was really far behind. One major piece of legislation passed as part of FDR's New Deal was the Rural Electrification Act, which in 1936 allowed the federal government to make low-cost loans for the purposes of bringing electricity to rural America. This was an important issue to FDR and one that he first raised as governor of New York while he was still living in this building. The period of 1935 and 1936 also marked a significant step forward in the electrification of music. And while many credit Leo Fender with the electric bass invention with the precision bass in 1950, which this model is a precision bass, the electric bass was actually invented by Paul Totmark in 1936. And 1935 also saw the invention of the infamous Hammond organ by Lawrence Hammond. The organ was marketed as an economical alternative to wind-driven pipe organs for churches in lower income areas and in private homes. And these instruments are still in use today and are often heard in funk, jazz, rock, pop, and gospel, which are really quintessential art forms of America. And these electric instruments are staples of American culture. Roosevelt realized the importance of the arts in American culture, stating that the American dream was the promise of not only economic and social justice, but also of cultural enrichment. In 1935, a New Deal program known as Federal One was created. This included the Federal Music Project, employing musicians, conductors, composers, and was the first one where federal money was used on culture. So in this piece, we're going to bring you the electrification of rural America. It's a tall order.
Titling Ghost of Gershwin. There is a fabulous web of connections between the Roosevelt House, Hunter, and Gershwin. Well, let's start at the beginning. The Roosevelt House and Hunter College. Hunter is, of course, just a few blocks away. FDR visited Hunter in 1940 to dedicate the new North Building, whose construction was funded for by funds in the New Deal. And Eleanor would often walk over to visit with students and speak at special events. After the death of Sarah in 1942, they sold their home so it could become a student center at Hunter. These connections take an interesting turn a few years later. A Gershwin piano, referring to the iconic American composer and pianist, George Gershwin, was donated to Hunter by his mother, Rose Gershwin, in 1947. Rose was on the board of the Roosevelt House League at Hunter, and when she died in 1948, a year after donating the 1897 Steinway, the League paid for a death notice in the New York Times that described her as a devoted patron of the Roosevelt House and the student activities. The piano spent more than 40 years here, right? Professor Richard Burke, brings back memories a little bit. He was a beloved professor here, and he actually passed away while I was a student here at Hunter. I was a part of his one of his last classes. But he was a beloved music history professor, and he said on this piano, whatever they did at Roosevelt House, we found all sorts of evidence that they used the piano. I know. They had dances and social events. They accompanied songs. So we can imagine the space lively with music. Later, it was moved to Hunter's main building, where the music department is, and it was restored. And there, its legacy is honored by great musicians like one of the Hunter Music Department's own, Jeffrey Burleson. He is professor of music and director of piano studies at Hunter, and he's performed Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue on that piano, on Gershwin's piano, with the Hunter Symphony. And it's a piece that he's played many times. And talking about this instrument in particular, he said that it radiated a kind of authenticity. Rhapsody in Blue in particular is a piece he played many times, but he felt a particular responsibility to do a good job on that piano, lest the ghost of Gershwin haunt his dreams. Which I love that quote so much, and it speaks to us because we often look for ghost stories in what we do. And there's something really special, I think, about ghost stories beyond whether you believe in the supernatural or not, but I think it tells us something about our history and the way that we think about our connections to each other over time. Sometimes it's a way of dealing with a tragedy, and we fold these stories into our social consciousness. Well, that's where we come in here. In this next piece, we're honoring this web of connections and calling to the ghost of Gershwin. If his ghost was ever in that piano, which maybe it was, then his ghost was indeed within these walls for over 40 years, and maybe he will visit us now for a moment.
don't know, I felt a little presence of some ghosts. So this brings us to our final piece of the evening. Music had an important place in this house and in the Roosevelt family. As we just heard, the Gershwin piano was but one of several notable pianos in the possession of the Roosevelts. On December 10th, 1938, Theodore Steinway presented a grand piano to President Franklin D. Roosevelt for the White House. Gilded scenes of American dance forms appear on its mahogany case, which is supported by 3 gilded eagle-shaped legs in the Art Deco style. And just 2 years ago, a Model M Steinway purchased by Eleanor Roosevelt in 1936 was returned to its original home in Hyde Park, just up the river from here. But here in this house, perhaps the most consistent and impactful music was during World War II. Right above us, there were weekly canteen evenings for soldiers and sailors who were temporarily in New York before embarking for their overseas assignments. Ruth Goodman Cohen, a 1946 graduate of Hunter, remembered how, at times, fun contrasted with the hard reality. A quote from her: "It was considered our public duty to attend the Roosevelt House canteen to try and build the morale of these fellows. Dancing with a partner wearing paratrooper boots was hard on one's feet. These battle-bound young men were able to forget briefly what lay ahead by chatting and relaxing in the pleasant surroundings of Roosevelt House's upstairs salon." The house represented, for me, a bright spot in a terrifying world of depressing events. It was an oasis of stability in a hideously violent world. So, let us celebrate the legacy of this house, honor the work that was accomplished here on this anniversary of the New Deal, remember the soldiers who did not return, and cherish the ideals of democratic living and progressive policy to which this house is a living testament through our own celebratory dance.